I'm Vinny Politan. This is Closing Arguments. Thanks so much for joining us on this Friday night. And as you just heard, a lot of stories to get through tonight. But you know what our bread and butter is here at Court TV. It's gavel-to-gavel coverage of the nation's biggest, most compelling trials. And we've got a brand new trial coming up next week right here on your front row seat to justice. And actually taking place in a place, I don't know if I've ever covered a case out of North Dakota. This trial out of North Dakota, a real small town, but a really big case. It's a quadruple murder. And as a former prosecutor, when I first look at a case, and I look at it and I say, okay, do prosecutors have a story to tell? Can they answer the questions that the jury's going to have? And the jury's going to have the questions that all of us have. What happened? Who's responsible? And why did it happen? And in this particular case, I am not sure prosecutors are going to be able to answer all the questions. Court TV legal correspondent Julie Janae has the latest for us from North Dakota, the story of a man charged with quadruple murder.
The murder of 4 co-workers at this property management company still baffles the town of Mandan, North Dakota. On April 1st, 2019, William and Lois Cobb, Adam Fuhrer, and Robert Fackler were all shot and stabbed to death inside RJR Maintenance and Management.
It was quite a shock that morning. That's not something normally that we would hear. I mean, it's something very unusual.
Deputy Chief of Police Lois Flayton recalls the shocking dispatch report.
Maybe 1 or 2 a year, and we may go a year or 2 without, but we do have them, but not multiple, not when you're looking at 4 deaths. That's something very unusual even for the state, not just Mandan.
The attacker carried out the massacre in a matter of minutes, then vanished, leaving a community on edge.
It took a while before we started to really piece together his trail to find out where he was going.
Surveillance footage shows the murder suspect going into RJR Management before business hours, then stealing a company truck to flee. The masked individual only drives a few yards to the Indigo Signs business next door.
And then he eventually left on foot and went over towards McDonald's, where he had a vehicle parked.
A McDonald's employee called 911 to report a suspicious person wearing a camouflage mask. The caller completely unaware of the slaughter just down the street.
We want to reiterate that we do not feel the public is in any danger. While we strongly believe that this is a targeted, isolated incident, the public should always keep their safety in mind.
3 days passed with no arrests. Then a break in the case came 44 miles away from the murder scene in Washburn, North Dakota. A deputy spotted a truck matching the suspect's vehicle. It belonged to Chad Isaak, the deputy's own chiropractor.
Evidence discovered on Isaak and in the vehicle provided probable cause to place Isaak under arrest for the murders.
Isaak was booked into jail, charged with 4 counts of murder, burglary, and unauthorized use of a vehicle. Police searched his mobile home, finding 9 shell casings and gun parts. Prosecutors say fibers found at the scene and on Isaak link him to the crime. What they don't have is a clear link between Isaak and the 4 victims.
You know, obviously with management companies, sometimes there's tenants that aren't happy about things. So it wasn't like they're like, oh yeah, this guy, he was in here screaming and yelling the other day, making threats. You know, we've been worried about him. There was nothing like that.
RJR managed the property where Isaak lived, but the company says he was a model tenant with no known issues. Now the 47-year-old faces life in prison for a workplace massacre that remains unexplained.
Since it happened, the question that we get all the time is, what was the motive? And we have to answer, we don't know. We don't know.
We don't know. That, to me, that's a potential major problem in this case because jurors want those questions answered. Now, it's not a requirement. Prosecutors don't have to prove motive. We talk about it all the time here on Court TV. But jurors certainly like to know why, especially a quadruple murder like this. Why would he do it? if in fact he's the one responsible. Court TV legal correspondent Julie Janae is in Mandan, North Dakota tonight and is joining us live. Julia, great to see you. So what exactly is the defendant here, Chad Isaak, charged with?
Vinny, he's charged with, of course, 4 counts of murder for the deaths of husband and wife Lois and William Cobb, for Adam Ferrer, and also the property owner, the person who owned that business, Robert Fackler. So those 4 counts of murder are also included with a burglary charge for entering into those premises where he wasn't supposed to be and carrying out a felony. Also, unlawful entry into or concealment within a vehicle. You know, he is accused of taking the company vehicle and going just a few yards away to the next business over when he left the scene. And also that includes the unauthorized use of a vehicle, all relating to that company vehicle there at RGR. And that's really the start of that trail that police were able to follow that eventually helped them find him.
Yeah, this is a case. We heard that they don't know what the motive is, but to me, it doesn't. I'm trying to figure out why. What happened here, because it's such a horrific crime. It seems to just come out of left field. So you mentioned the investigation leading. How exactly did police find him? What were the clues that led them to Chad Isaak, the man they believe is responsible?
Well, really, they were trying to find any kind of leads and tips, and they were talking to those coworkers who worked there at the company, figuring out if there was anyone who might have had a motive to do this, anyone that they had problems with, and they weren't really getting anywhere. But they were also piecing together all of those surveillance videos, not just from the company, but from every business down this highway, which we know from now their investigation, they were able to link a person who moved from first that business next door to the company, then to a McDonald's and dealership down the street, and then someone's private vehicle that they saw who they believed to be the murder suspect get into and then drive away. There were some defining characteristics of that vehicle that they were able to make out in that surveillance video. They weren't able to see the person very well, only the build and height, but they weren't able to see that person's face because they were wearing a mask. But that white vehicle there, the Ford F-150, some rust that was on it, on certain sides of it, that was what they released to all of the authorities in this area. So that's how a McLean County deputy knew about who they were looking for. You can imagine this entire area was on edge, on alert. And 3 days later, that deputy spotted a vehicle that matched that description of who they were looking for. And then he realized that the person who owned that vehicle was someone that he saw regularly and someone that he had visited before in that town for a chiropractic adjustment.
Speaking of the towns, like I mentioned at the top, I don't think I've ever covered a trial out of North Dakota. What are the size of the towns that we're talking about here?
Well, Mandan, city of Mandan, has about 22,000 people as far as the population. They're about 10 miles away from the capital of North Dakota, Bismarck, which their population is about 32,000. And then Washburn, where this suspect lives and where he had his place of business, his chiropractic practice, that was the size of 1,200 people. This was an extremely small town. And I asked the chief deputy that I interviewed, Lois Flayton, whether or not she was familiar with him. And she said she really wasn't. She hadn't heard of him. But people in Washburn knew a lot about him. He seemed to be someone who was very reputable in the community, worked in the downtown area, and was even advertised in some of their local magazines for someone who helped with wellness. So really small towns, and you can just imagine how this rocked this area to have this quadruple murder happen when they sometimes get murders once, maybe twice a year.
And finally, there have been some issues here with the defense team for Isaak. What's that drama all about?
Well, it seems that this defendant is unhappy with his legal counsel. There was a motions hearing last year around July where he was trying to get the judge to listen to him. This was about something separate, a motion to suppress, a motion for change of venue. But he interrupted and asked the judge if he could talk to the court about some issues that he had with his attorneys. The judge let him know it wasn't the time, it wasn't the place. He needed to go through his attorney if he had an issue. He really tried to press and say that I need my voice to be heard. I just need a few minutes. Ultimately, that attorney that was was representing him then withdrew from the case, and that left the second chair, who was on the case but not intending to be the lead in this case. They became appointed by this court to be his lead counsel. That firm also petitioned the court recently as earlier this year, asking to be taken off the case, but the judge has not granted that, and they are still on the docket as the representation for this defendant.
Yeah, that is one thing in those criminal cases. Once the defense makes their appearance, they only can get out if the judge permits it. Julia Janae in North Dakota on this Friday night. Thank you so much, Julia. Great to see you. Things are starting up Monday in this case. Let's bring in our think tank. Joining us tonight in New York, former senior homicide prosecutor Bernardo Villalona. In Cleveland, Ohio, criminal defense attorney, law professor at Cleveland State, Ian Friedman. And in Houston, Texas, criminal defense attorney, Brian Weiss. Good evening, everyone. Bernardo, let me ask you something. You have prosecuted many homicides. How many times you've been in a courtroom as a prosecutor, you're in there, you're presenting your case, and you look over at the other table, you see that defendant, and you have no idea in the world why this person committed the crime?
Vinny, I think 95% of the homicides that I tried the last 10 years that I was at the DA's office, you just never know. But then, I flip it to the jury.
Wait. There's a difference between you just never know, like, well, it could have been this, could have been that, versus like, we have no idea.
Oh, no idea at all. It happens. But the thing is, Vinny, you got to think. It's like, look, I'm not a killer, so I don't think as a killer, so I have no idea. Why would you kill someone? And that's exactly what I used to tell the jury. It's like, we can't get in the mind of a killer and try to tell you why he did it, because we're not that. So that's a good thing that we don't have to prove motive in any homicide case. It helps, but it's a good thing that you have to prove
Bernardo,
motive,
that is a
very difficult.
That's an amazing workaround. I love that, right? usually it's the guys down here who have the answer for everything, right? But that's perfect. Ian, looking at a case like this, if he's your client, you sit down with him. Do you try to figure out what happened here and why it happened? And again, you're not presuming him guilty. We're presuming him innocent. But, you're behind closed doors, attorney-client privilege, all that sort of stuff. Is that an important aspect to understand if you're on the other side, defending?
Every defense lawyer is different, but I myself like to know everything. I do like to understand the whys and every aspect of the case. Some lawyers may say we don't want to know because then we're foreclosed from putting him on the stand if we have to. He's locked into a certain story. Everyone's different, but I myself like to know all aspects of the case. There's no surprises that way.
Yeah, Brian, it seems, we heard from the investigator, Julie Janae's interview, that they get that question all the time. Don't get a lot of murders out there. This is a big one. And they don't know why. How is that going to play in front of the jury?
Vinny, I've got breaking news. I've known you since the summer of '42, and I'm going to disagree with you. I don't think it's an issue. And this is why. Because like an old homicide detective told me a very long time ago when I asked them why people engage in conduct that makes our head spin like The Exorcist, he goes, son, everybody's got their reasons. We don't know what this guy's reason happens to be. There may be no reason at all. He may have an extra Y chromosome. He may be having a bad day. Maybe he had a beef with one of the victims and decided he had to kill the remaining 3 to dispose of all the witnesses. I think that with the sheer horror of this crime, that is going to fill in the gaps on the evidentiary canvas merely because nobody happens to know what's inside the mind of this accused killer.
All right, let's take a listen to the Mandan police chief here talking about what happened.
On April 4th, 2019, at approximately 7:46 p.m., Mandan Police Department arrested Chad Isaak, 44, of Washburn, on 4 counts of AA felony murder. On Monday, April 1st, 2019, at 7:29 a.m., Mandan Police responded to a medical call at RJR Maintenance and Management. Once on scene, officers found 4 individuals deceased. The victims had suffered stab wounds and or gunshot wounds. Many hours of video surveillance were reviewed by investigators, and a suspect's vehicle was identified. Further investigation led to McLean County Sheriff's Office locating the vehicle in Washburn. McLean County deputies conducted a traffic stop on the suspect vehicle and detained Isaac while a search warrant was executed on the vehicle. Evidence discovered on Isaac and in the vehicle provided probable cause to place Isaac under arrest for the murders.
So in tracking him down, Bernardo, the video doesn't reveal his face because the face of the killer is concealed, but they relied a lot on the rust on the vehicle, and that's how they got him. You know, to me, that makes sense. That's something that I think a juror can understand. Yeah, we're looking for this car, this specific aspect of it. It matches, and that kind of opens the door to everything else.
It's a start. It's a start. But what does a lot of people say? No face, no case. So you just never know. I mean, all it proves is that that car was at the scene, but it doesn't really show you what actually happened. So, but we'll find out more next week because, as you can see, the police department is not releasing much information at all to the public at this time. But I'm curious and anxious actually to hear the opening statements to see exactly what evidence do they have on this guy to kill 4 human beings, especially when you're talking about stabbing and or shooting. You know, it's usually one or the other. And either way, you usually know which one it is. But with the sheriff, he said and or stabbing and or shooting, which I find kind of confusing.
Yeah. And this is, again, this is a guy who's a chiropractor. The deputy who arrested him, it was his chiropractor. He had a wellness practice. Something strange happened here if he is, in fact, responsible for all of this. All right, again, Monday, that trial begins. Our coverage, of course, begins.